For the longest time, the Arctic was this symbol of cooperation after the Cold War. It was just this remote, frozen place, governed by science and peace. But that era is over. As the ice melts, this quiet region is turning into one of the planet's most critical strategic hotspots. And we're going to dive into how that's happening. And that quote really says it all, doesn't it? The changes unfolding at the top of the world, they're having these massive global consequences. We're talking about everything from international security to the world economy. The stakes for all of us couldn't be higher. So, what's the engine driving this whole new geopolitical drama? Well, it's the simple fact that the Arctic is warming up at an absolutely alarming rate. And as that ice melts, it's not just sea levels that are rising, it's the region's strategic value too. So yeah, why? Why is some melting ice causing the world's biggest powers to race for control? Well, it's this really volatile mix of brand new economic opportunities and some very old military rivalries. But to really get what's happening now, let's start by looking at the peace that's been lost. See, to really grasp why things are so tense now, you have to look back at the way things were. For almost a whole generation, the Arctic was this rare and, frankly, remarkable example of harmony. Okay, so picture this. After the Cold War, a time when the Arctic was seen as a potential flight path for nuclear missiles, a totally new vision started to take shape. It kicked off in 1987 when the Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev actually called for the region to become a zone of peace. And that idea set the stage for the Arctic Council, where all 8 Arctic nations basically agreed to put military stuff aside and just cooperate on science and protecting the environment. And for a long, long time, it really lived up to that reputation. The Arctic became this model for how countries could work together, a place where even big geopolitical rivals could find some common ground. But that whole era of exceptionalism, well, it came to a very sudden and very dramatic end.
The era of peace was completely shattered by a single event that happened thousands of miles away from the Arctic Circle. But it was an event that totally redrew the region's geopolitical map and basically replaced all that cooperation with confrontation. Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, that changed everything. It prompted Finland and Sweden to join NATO, and that instantly transformed the entire dynamic of the Arctic Council. Suddenly, it wasn't a council of 8 equals anymore. It was a stark divide, 7 NATO members on one side and an isolated Russia on the other. And all that cooperative work? It's been pretty much frozen ever since.
And this new political divide is quickly becoming a military one. Russia, which keeps most of its nuclear weapons up north, has reopened dozens of old Soviet bases. So, what's the response? NATO just conducted its biggest Arctic drills since the Cold War, and the US has brought back its specialized Arctic forces. Tensions are flaring, with jets having close calls up there near Alaska. The region is, for all intents and purposes, a new front line. Okay, so we've got the military angle. But that's only half the story. The other massive driver here is the creation of these powerful new economic incentives. This race for shipping routes and natural resources is just pouring fuel on the fire.
I mean, just look at this. The physical transformation is absolutely staggering. What used to be a nearly permanent ice cap that locked the whole region in ice, well, now it opens up for several months every year. And that's creating economic possibilities that were just unthinkable a few decades ago.
And if you want to put a number on it, we are talking about 2.6 million square kilometers of summer sea ice that has been lost since 1979. That's an area roughly the size of Argentina that has just vanished. And in its place, new waterways and access to whatever lies beneath. So, one of the biggest opportunities you hear about is new shipping lanes. The northern sea route right along Russia's coast could shave thousands of miles off trips from Europe to Asia. But let's keep it in perspective. Yeah, traffic is growing, about 100 cargo ships made the trip last year, but that is a tiny fraction of the 13,000 ships that go through the Suez Canal. The Arctic is still a really unpredictable and frozen place for most of the year.
The real prize, though, the thing everyone is really after, might be what's under the seabed. The U.S. Geological Survey thinks the Arctic holds something like 30% of the world's undiscovered natural gas and 13% of its oil. And beyond that, you've got huge deposits of rare earth minerals. You know, the stuff you need for smartphones and electric cars. As the ice pulls back, getting to these resources becomes more and more possible, and the competition to claim them just gets more intense. But this race isn't just between the 8 countries with Arctic coastlines. A new, very powerful player has entered the game.
one with no territory in the region, but with huge global ambitions. China has declared itself a near-Arctic state. Now that's a pretty controversial claim, right? Especially since its closest border is 1,400 kilometers away. But it's Beijing's way of signaling, hey, we want to say in what happens here. Through its Polar Silk Road strategy, it's pouring money into Arctic infrastructure and resource projects, and it's found a very willing partner in an increasingly isolated Russia.
But China's ambitions have definitely been met with some serious skepticism. A lot of local communities and even the Arctic nations themselves are really wary of becoming too reliant on Chinese money. So while China clearly wants to be a polar superpower, its influence has been a bit more limited than it probably hoped for.
So let's put all the pieces together. You've got this new military front line, an intense race for resources, and outside powers like China all trying to get their piece of the pie. It all adds up to a complete reversal of the region's entire character.
There used to be this perfect slogan that captured that old era of cooperation: high north, low tension. It was a place defined by science, peace, and working together.
Well, today, that slogan has been completely inverted. The new reality is high north, high tension. In just a few short years, the entire strategic climate of the Arctic has flipped. That exception of peace has been replaced by the new rule of conflict.
Which leaves us with a critical and honestly kind of scary question. As the ice keeps melting, opening up new routes and new resources, can the world's nations actually manage this new frontier peacefully? Or is the struggle for the Arctic going to become a new kind of Cold War? The great game in the high north has officially begun.